Hello everyone. I want to give a response to my article on the necessity of a constitutional convention, which I published in the Arizona Daily Star on Sunday, January 22nd. The responses to my article have been interesting, especially because they reveal the public confusion about the nature of a constitutional convention. So I want to clarify the confusion. Here is the text of Article 5. Quote, "The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate." End quote. The amendment process outlined in Article 5 has been successful in the past, in part because of the recognized need for an amendment, and in part because of the particular power arrangements at the time of the amendment. The best way to stop an amendment is to get 1/4 of the states, plus one, to not vote for it. Out of 50 states, it takes 13 to stop an amendment, 12 plus 1. Here are the 13 liberal-leaning states that can stop any amendment: California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, Maryland, Illinois. This leaves Minnesota and New Mexico as surplus states to any amendment. Here are 13 conservative-leaning states that can stop any amendment: Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. This leaves Alaska, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota as surplus states to block any amendment. So it is mathematically impossible for crazy and extreme amendments to be ratified. Now, crazy and extreme amendments are guaranteed to be introduced at any convention, but they will never reach the magic number of 38 states for ratification. Many people are justifiably afraid that, with the majority of states being conservative, any convention will have conservative delegates. However, we have to remember that the states reflect land, not people. The majority of people live in liberal states, and delegate selection will be based on population, not land. The conservative delegates will definitely propose conservative amendments, believing that the conservative states will ratify them. All we have to remember is that at least 13 states will block conservative amendments. This leads to the obvious question: why have a convention when the amendment process has worked in the past? The answer? The Congress is so gerrymandered that the amendment process will likely never happen again. No amendment will ever again capture the necessary 2/3 of the House and the Senate. If any amendment does somehow pass the House and the Senate, it would be guaranteed defeat by the opposition. It's very easy for a small but organized opposition to defeat a single amendment. It is very hard for a small but organized opposition to defeat a slate of amendments coming from a constitutional convention organized by the states. A constitutional convention is therefore necessary to make it harder for any opposition to defeat a single amendment. There is also a lot of fear that the current political arrangement will bias a constitutional convention. The solution to this fear is simple. Make sure the delegates to any convention are secluded and cut off from communication from the rest of society, just like the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Finally, there is confusion about what a convention could actually accomplish. Would a convention be able to propose a new constitution that looks completely different from the one we already have? The answer is no. A constitutional convention is empowered to propose only amendments, not a whole new constitution. So reform must have a sequential strategy. First, go for the low-hanging fruit by demanding that our state representatives submit legislation calling for an Article 5 convention. We must have faith that for every conservative delegate from Arizona, this delegate will be balanced by a liberal delegate from California or New York. The worst that can happen is that any amendments coming out of a convention will not meet the 38 state threshold for ratification. This leads to the second part. If no amendment passes the 38 state threshold, then we, the people, must go outside of the constraints of Article 5 and organize another constitutional convention to draft a completely new constitution. The first part will likely take 5 to 10 years. If it fails, the second part will likely take another 5 to 10 years. Now we have to ask, why do this at all? The answer? The alternative is worse. Our entire government is based on the consent of the governed. There is a very high probability that over the next 4 years, the federal government will lose the consent of the governed. When the consent of the governed disappears, as it did in 1776 and 1860, the only remaining courses of action are civil war and violent revolution. I want to avoid both civil war and violent revolution because they are always highly destructive to life and property. A constitutional convention is thus the best option we have right now to avoid civil war and violent revolution.